This is MacVoices TV. MacVoices TV is brought to you by Drobo. Hard drives fill up and wear out. A single hard drive failure can lose your data. Not with Drobo. Drobo provides the best data storage experience ever. For tips on using Drobo in your home or office, visit drobo.com/tips and facts. Good afternoon, Macworld. Thanks for coming. We are the Mac Roundtable, a group of independent media content producers that get together usually once every couple weeks to discuss whatever's going on in the Macintosh world. We each produce our own independent shows, but we get together as a group to share a little wisdom, pick on each other a little, and kind of have some fun. So I'd like to go through and introduce you to everyone. My name is Chuck Joyner. I produce several different shows. The best place to go to find out about all of them is at MacVoicesGroup.com. Start with Katie.
I'm Katie Floyd. I produce a show, and you can't hear me. No, hello. You got my microphone. There we go. I'm Katie Floyd. I produce a show called the Mac Power Users Podcast along with David Sparks. You can find us at MacPowerUsers.com.
Hi, I'm Joseph Nilo. I used to be a podcaster and hung out with these folks a long time ago, but currently work with HiLoMedia.com.
Hi, I'm Dave Sparks. I podcast with Katie at Mac Power Users, and I'm also the editor at MacSparky.com.
I'm Ken Ray. I do a daily podcast called macOS Ken, a live podcast on Wednesday nights called macOS Ken Live, and a premium podcast called macOS Ken Day 6. Hi.
Hi, I'm Tim Verpoorten with the MacReviewCast at MacReviewCast.com.
And I'm Allison Sheridan of the NosillaCast podcast, hosted at Podfeed.com, a technology geek podcast with an ever so slight Macintosh bias.
No, you had to get that in. Hi, I'm Don McAllister from ScreenCastsOnline.
My name is Victor Cajiao, and I do the typical Mac user podcast.
And my name is John Chambers, and I do the 1 minute tip.
And believe it or not, folks, this is not our entire group. So please visit MacRoundtable.com. You can link off to each of our shows there. I have to tell you, these are the rock stars of independent Mac media content creation. So go check them out. Before we get started, I also want to make sure we thank Macworld Expo and Macworld for the use of the Macworld Live Stage. We really, really appreciate it. We also want to thank the folks at Panasonic who gave us that very nice big monitor down there that so some of you can see us, which may not be the best thing in the world, but what are you going to do? Our topic today is the future and the evolution of the Mac operating system and the iOS, the iDevice operating system. I guess a little bit of a disclaimer. None of us really know where it's going, but we are keen observers of what has been happening and the changes that have been made. I'd like to ask both the panel and the audience, how many people here used System 9? Used, past tense. Past tense, yeah, not now. Okay, so we have a lot of history here on both the panel and in the audience. How many people own an iDevice of one kind or another? Okay, so then you all have a pretty good framework too for seeing what's happening and all. There's a lot of discussion about when the next version of the macOS comes out, Lion, that we're going to see components of the iOS migrating over there. We're also watching two different platforms develop here, one that sits on your desktop or in your lap, and the other one which theoretically is carried around with you, probably lives in your lap part of the time and in your hand the rest. So I'm just going to start pitching that to the group and ask, where do you think it's going and what do you like about it? David, I want to start with you, put you on the spot. Because you're a business user, and this is pretty important to you because you earn your living using these tools to support what you do.
Well, I think it's really no mystery that the success of the iPad and the iOS operating system in general is trickling through Apple. And if you look at the previews of the Lion operating system 10.7 that's going to be coming out later this year, it's definitely picking up pieces of the iOS operating system. We've already seen it with the App Store. Has everybody here been buying apps in the App Store yet? It's really simple. I mean, and it was one of the big complaints a lot of us had with Mac OS X is how do you explain to somebody how to install a new application? It felt like you needed to throw salt over your shoulder and do an incantation or something. But now you just go on the App Store, you push a button, and it's in your dock, whether you like it or not. I think the next thing we're going to see is we're going to see that iPadification of our Macs. And when Steve did the keynote and showed off Lion, they didn't show apps, but I'd bet a nickel that the new version of Address Book and iCal is going to look a lot more like what you've got on your iPad right now than what's on your Mac. So I think the idea is the simplification. We had a long time ago, when the Mac first came out, the idea was it would be the computer for everyone. It took 25 years and it's called an iPad, but that's what it is. So expect them to try and put as much of that technology as they can into the operating system of the Mac, would be my guess.
Victor, I caught you, didn't I?
You did.
Victor, you're probably the most recent switcher on the panel. You came over from the Windows side, and so I think that gives you a unique perspective on what you've seen just in your time on the Mac and watching the iOS devices come out. Where do you see it coming? Is it really superior to the Windows side? Is it an evolution, and is Windows doing anything to try to keep up?
Well, I think they're trying to keep up, but I think just Apple's way too ahead of the game, and it's because I think the foundation of Apple, 27 years ago, if we talk about the first Mac, which I think happened this week, it was about making a device that was a consumer device. It was almost like a toaster or something that would be so natural to use. And I think that finally technology has caught up to the point where they are making these devices that kind of meld together. So I think they're taking the desktop computer, the devices like this, and they're trying to give us this unified user experience, and for the first time in technology history, they can make that happen. I think our PC brethren are at a disadvantage, if we will, because Apple's just always had this in mind. You have to start with the end in mind, and Apple has stuck to that because of Steve Jobs' vision. I think they just lack vision. They're too fragmented, and it's always too little, too late, and we see evidence of that for these devices that get close, but no cigar.
Ken, Apple seems to have a lot of courage. Apple seems to be willing to take big jumps, to take risks, to throw things out there that don't always work, or at least aren't always as popular or widely adopted. And I'm thinking about things like Spaces. Some people love Spaces, but it doesn't seem to have hit the mainstream. Any perspective on that with what we think they might try to do next? What they might throw out there at us?
Well, I was talking about this actually with a friend of mine last night. What you're saying about bravery, there was this great article in the New York Times recently where they were talking about, what's Apple going to be like without Steve Jobs for the short term, for the long term. And what they brought up was people asked, as he was introducing the iPod, how much market research they did, how much focus testing they did, and Jobs said none. It's not the consumer's job to know what they want. They've got this clear idea of what they want it to be like. So, is it brave, or is it just, sticking with their vision, I guess? I'm not sure if that's... The thing about Spaces, though, is it's more like... Personally, I think of it as more of a power user kind of thing, and it feels like... I don't want to say dumbing down, but, there's definitely much more of a consumerization going on, it feels like, towards the Mac. What Dave was saying a minute ago, it feels like it's going to be much more... it's going to be exciting to buy a computer, not you have to buy a computer. It's going to be exciting to buy a Mac. Will they necessarily even be as powerful as the ones that are out today? Not necessarily, because it feels like it's getting so sexy just to the average consumer that we're going to be okay with the idea of this is enough computer for what I do because it's got the App Store, because it's got these different features built in. And it may not be as powerful as the Dell that you can get for $300 less, but you're not going to care because it's going to have so much other stuff built in and so much. It's just going to look cool too, which is going to be important for a lot of consumers. So I don't know if I answered your question, Chuck, but that's what I was thinking.
No, I'm not sure there are any answers here to any of this, but it's interesting to speculate.
Sweet.
Don, touch interface versus mouse. We've already heard Steve Jobs say that touch interfaces, touching the screen and all gives good demo, but it's not really something you want to do. Do you agree with that on a desktop machine or in that environment?
Well, I think that the problem with the desktop machine is the ergonomics, because it's really difficult to actually touch a screen and sort of hold your hand up for a prolonged length of time. So although you have the convenience of using a touch device, I don't think it's really feasible on a desktop machine. I think we'll see more of the way they brought out the trackpad as the initial sort of entrance to touch for desktop machines. So I think we'll see more of that. probably more iOS devices that will come through that will sort of integrate with your desktop machine as well. So you can actually use, your iPad version 2 or iPad version 3 as a touch interface to your main desktop machine. I think that's pretty much a given. That would seem to be the way to go. The horizontal. No, it's not going to work. There's also, options for gesture-based. We've seen some things in CES whereby they've got sort of scanning units that you can actually gesture in front of objects and that will pick up your gesture. So again, that sort of technology, I think, is something they'll probably be wanting to explore more.
So you think it will come together to some degree, just maybe not necessarily on screen?
Yeah, I think it will. I think the gesture is just so much more natural. It puts you in touch with your data. I mean, one of the pleasures of using a handheld device is just that tactile feel that you're actually manipulating something in real time. You're not abstracted from the data by using a hardwired device. So I think that's the more natural way that people will start to use their machines. Yeah, definitely.
Allison?
Chuck, I played along and was good as long as I could stand it. Are you telling me people don't want something like the BlackBerry Torch with the touch screen and a keyboard? I mean, come on, this is a great device. You don't think we want this?
Why are you carrying a BlackBerry?
Just for the comedy.
Yes. Well, you succeeded. Congratulations. John?
Because I do a lot of teaching with artists, though, it's interesting with the touch screen, sitting back from the screen. With my students, we have the screens that where you wait with the Wacom pen and you actually draw on it. So a lot of it has to do with the type of work that you're going to be using. If you're going to be using spreadsheets and such, sitting back and using a keyboard would make sense. But as an artist with a brush stroke and pressure sensitive and those types of things, then a large touch screen is really great. They come in really, really handy. So a lot of it depends on, the background of the person, the student.
Yeah, and that's, it's a really interesting point because we tend to think, I think, separately of the interface of how we operate the computer versus what we do within a program. In a program, depends. You may be doing a spreadsheet where you're going to need a keypad. You may be doing text entry where it makes much more sense for a keyboard. So I think the focus here is just on the iOS the OS and the iOS in general, but you still have to do other things within it. Ken, you were waving.
Well, do you believe, when Steve Jobs stands up and does 5 minutes on why touch sucks for a keyboard or why it's bad for a laptop, so we get that by the end of the year, right? It's sort of like Apple's not going to get into phones. Who would want to watch video on an iPod? Just because he says it's bad, do you really think he thinks it's bad? Do you think they don't have one that they're working on, or 2 or 5?
No, I buy it. I don't think it was a sales pitch because I try to think what I'm doing at home when I'm sitting in front of my iMac. Mm-hmm. Reaching out like that all the time. If I had a wall-sized thing where I could stand in front and go wild, maybe so. But for my desktop, I really can't see it.
But Chuck, how many times have you just sort of reached for something that isn't touch today, but you expect everything to be touch nowadays because we're so used to it?
Never.
Really?
Right, never.
Really? Wow.
Serious.
I do it on my BlackBerry all the time.
Allison will be appearing at BlackBerry World.
I was in my office and I was proofreading documents, and I literally took my fingers and tried to flick on paper. How many people have done that? Okay, I don't feel as stupid now.
You're all being trained is what's happening here.
Or I'm reading a magazine and I want to find something on the page and my brain thinks Command F. It's like, oh God, I gotta look with my eyes.
Tim, I know you do some video. I know you review an awful lot of software. One of the things right now with the iOS devices is that we don't have true multitasking, that we sort of have one program on screen and we have to jump between programs in a less than ideal way. That's got to change at some point on the iOS devices at least, don't you think?
Well, there's a lot of applications out there that are just built for multitasking. And then there's applications that aren't. Getting back to the touching end of it, Final Cut is a good example of it. Final Cut would be a perfect application for touchscreens. You'd think you could move things around, you could work with gestures. But on the other hand, most of the Final Cut people that I know use nothing but the keyboard. Probably 95% of the time it's all keyboard. So apps are apps are going to be a while before they change, because even if you think something should work, you get back to how it was taught and how you worked with it on the OS for that many years, and you realize, it's not going to change overnight. It's going to take some time.
Joseph, I want to get you in here because you do a lot of Final Cut. And I had an interesting discussion with the people up at Smart Technologies this morning with the Smart Board, and they were talking about using Final Cut on something that is the size of a whiteboard. And my first reaction was, wow, that would be cool. And then I realized that, for a touch interface that big, yes, it would make sense. But when you're doing video editing, you've got some precise little movements down there. Can you get that precise with this on a screen that sits on your desktop?
I wouldn't know until I tried. My natural inclination is no. But, the thought I was going to add to this discussion is currently now, I just happened to one day get a wild hair, do a search in the Final Cut Pro help document on multi-touch. Turns out there's a bunch of multi-touch, very useful multi-touch commands built into Final Cut. And that make it really nice to have a magic trackpad. Swiping to go home, literally turning like a jog wheel, and they're really useful things. So I think that it's a natural evolution where, if at the base you're a clicker, and then all of a sudden you learn all the keyboard commands and become a power user, then you have a little extra, there's more stuff you can do. And in something like editing video or maybe working with audio, there is a natural rhythm to it. So getting your hands physically on something, even though it's virtual, that could be a really feasible, feasible thing.
Well, you and Don, you both do a lot of video. I guess Tim does too. And I know, Don, you've talked about you use some of the specialized tools. So they're not touch interface, but they're specialized. These touch devices, the trackpads and all, it gives us an opportunity to maybe have custom controls that are programmable into the very same device.
Yeah, I tend to use mainly a Wacom tablet to actually do my video editing with, which some people find strange, but it's a very natural thing to do. Actually drawing and dragging with a pen. There's less fatigue. The thing with a Magic Trackpad I find is that if you use, even though it's a horizontal surface, if you use it for more than an hour or two, you can start to get some fatigue in your hand, and it doesn't seem that natural. So I use the Wacom tablet to do all my sort of fine cut editing, etc., and that works really well. You can edit video now using touch because you've got iMovie on the iPhone. They've already brought out an interface that does that. I've not used it a great deal myself, but there are ways around these various things, and you can get a fair level of preciseness using your finger.
And you can be happy with the results?
Say again?
You feel like you could be happy with the results of the precision you can get out of the finger?
If it's engineered correctly and it's engineered to do that particular job, you should be able to.
Okay. Katie, I started by asking David in the business world. You two are an attorney, and so you use these tools not as tech tools but as business tools. What do you want in the next generation of either the Mac or the iOS?
One of the things I still want is the ability to do what I need to do. And one of the things that concerns me about where Apple is going is you see some of the limitations that they've put on the Mac App Store. Evernote is an example of this. One of my favorite programs, Evernote did a post on their blog about, the day after the Mac App Store opened, they saw the downloads of their Mac app applications skyrocket and the number of their Mac app users just go through the roof. But yet if you download the Evernote application from their website and you download the Evernote application from the Mac App Store, you're going to be missing some features. You're going to be missing the web clipper icon. You're going to be missing the print to Evernote feature. Because Apple has put specific restrictions on, hey, if you want to play in the Mac App Store, you've got to play by our rules. You can't have certain background processes. You can't have certain add-ons. And that worries me. We've already run into the limitations of you can't have any trial software. You can't, upgrading from a light version to a pro version is a bit of a problem. So there's some real problems with this. What are we going to call it? Car versus truck ecosystem, as Steve Jobs called it, at All Things D, that we're moving. So I welcome the idea of making things simpler. I welcome the idea of trying to bring more people into the fold and making things as easy as possible. But let's not sacrifice usability for that. Let's keep the power users in mind too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And in fact, I want to take that to Allison. because everybody up here probably qualifies to one degree or another as a power user, and a lot of the people in the audience. But there are a lot of people that don't make the trek to San Francisco that aren't quite as intense with this as we all are, that depend on these machines to get things done. You don't want to leave them out because some of them want to dig under the hood, but more importantly, some of them really want the power user features, and yet Apple does seem to be exerting a little more control. Is that something we worry about, Allison? Do we? And if we do, how do we voice our concern properly?
Well, what I keep thinking about with this is, what do we have to gain and what do we have to lose with the convergence of these two platforms? So I started trying to think of what are all the things that bug me about iOS, and maybe there's an opportunity for us to bring more things into the iOS that exist in the Mac platform today. Like, how many times do you wish you had a control key on the keyboard on the iPad? I'm always wanting to do a control click, copy, paste kind of thing. I really, really miss things like that, and I'd like to see some of that back to my Mac, then back to the iPad, maybe circle some of that stuff back. I'd also was thinking a lot about the way the iPad, you can hand this, everybody's seen the video of the 3-year-old doing amazing things with it, right? A friend of mine has a mother-in-law who has Alzheimer's, and she loves this thing. She can't hardly communicate anymore, but man, she plays on it, plays with pictures. There's something at our base level of the way this works with us that we don't have on the Mac. I mean, we pretend it's all the easiest thing in the world, and then you sit down with somebody who's not computer literate, and you're just like, no, I said right click or whatever. You know, we need that ease of the iPad to slide and slither into what's going on in the Mac. But we also need a lot of the functionality, I think, to slide the other way to get us some of the more powerful things like you talked about that would allow us to do more with the iPad. But one thing about the store, I wanted to respond to what Katie was saying, the concern about the store. The way I'm looking at it is, think about the Apple Store itself. If you've got an app and it's going to be sold in the Apple Store, or you've got the glyph and it's being sold in the Apple Store, you're not whining about what terms and conditions you had to sign to do that, because you're going to make a trunk load of money for getting to have it in there. But you can still go down to Best Buy and buy the different thing. So maybe that's what the App Store is. It's just kind of the premium place. If you get listed in there, you're like, woohoo, that's awesome. But you can also be outside with other things, as long as Steve lets them.
Yeah, but we all do this, I think, with Apple products, with Apple services. They bring out the App Store, and we expect all the problems to be solved. I mean, there are a couple utilities, and I don't mind naming Default Folder and Super Duper, that are not in the App Store because they don't play within Apple's limitations. And maybe for some good reasons, because they are the kind of things that, at least theoretically, you could do some damage with if you didn't know what you're doing. So is it reasonable to expect Apple to have all those questions answered right out of the gate, or is it better for them to, as Steve once said, ship and then work it out? Victor? I see you shaking your head.
No, I don't think it's reasonable, because I think that we have to be aware that we are in the midst of a renaissance. And with that comes some pain. And the evidence of that is out there in those applications. I was shown an application by Jeff last night called WordLens. I wrote a sentence in Spanish, and this thing translated it in real time. That's groundbreaking stuff. Apple is bringing new blood into the community when it comes to developers that think differently. Hello, I think I'm maybe the earliest switcher here, or the latest switcher, but I know that that's what Apple stands for. So if we're bringing that, what we're going to have to do as users is also be willing to, once again, think different. And that means breaking some of our old paradigms. Today, Super Duper's not there. It's a great app. We all depend on it. But who knows what some guy out there has ready for us with Lion that will let us do the same thing and make us go, well, of course. That's the way it should have always been done. But we have to be open to that, and if we close our doors to that because we think, Apple's just leading the ship and that's all, I think we're being naive. I think Apple's given us the palette so that the developers can paint. That's my 2 cents on that.
There's one other little problem that, some of us suffer from up here, and some of you, not everybody, and that's a little bit of gray hair. We've been at this, a lot of you raised your hand. You've been around since System 9 or earlier. So we come with a lot of baggage. I've heard a number of people say, but I don't want it to change. And I think that's sort of missing the point. We're Mac users. We're about change. We're about pushing the edge into the future. And I personally want to continue to be part of that community, and I don't want Apple to just hold back from, because maybe somebody's getting a little old. I hope they keep bringing the kids into their engineering department and push the edges, because otherwise they're going to turn into a Redmond-based company. David, you don't want to see that happen, do you? What? You don't want to see that happen. You don't want to see Apple stop innovating.
Well, I don't think it matters what I think. Apple's never going to sit still. I mean, that's why they've had this great success. I mean, what was it, the iPad? Was it the iPod Mini, right? Was that what it was called? The most successful selling iPod, and they just yanked it because they decided they wanted to go a different direction. And when the iPad came out, everybody said how it would be a failure. And I'm looking around here, and I don't think it is. So I think it's great. I like the way they're innovative.
John, you mentioned you teach kids that are artists. You have a more artistic focus than probably anyone up here. What do the changes in the OS mean to you? I mean, are there things that you want as an educator and as an artist?
Well, you know what? Well, it's interesting because I was with the Mac since the 128K, right? And we knew what every file did on the computer in the early days. You know, and then they would add and add and add. And I like going through the file structure. I like opening up the folders. I like to see what's inside and file extensions and things like that. But I'm a power user. But now on the other side of the coin, you know, my father he's 92, and you know, show him this iPad, and all of a sudden he's interested in computers. He was never interested in computers in his life. This was this newfangled thing. So he doesn't care about file folders and putting things inside of. He just wants to open it, make it work, look at pictures, put it away. So it's simplified. So it's like this separation between the power and the ease, and you know, Apple keeps creating new things and putting things together, and it's just a period of time before they're going to simplify all of these different components. It's like I'm thinking of the jog wheel, you know, for video editing. Well, you know, you grab the jog wheel and you turn it. Well, isn't that like the Magic Pad? Isn't that the same thing? You know, it's just how you position your fingers and where you strike, you know, maybe with overlay and those types of things. So I always fall into that. It's like I love the power, but I sure like how they've made it easy for people who really aren't interested in it at all.
Don?
Yeah, what I think is really interesting is the HiLo effect. Because, you know, when the iPod first came out, people were saying, well, the iPod is having a limited effect, you know, limited HiLo effect on Mac sales, because people are seeing the iPod, seeing how easy it is to use, you know, it's a great music player. So they're looking at Apple computers. Well, now with the iPhone and with the iPad, I think they're taking the HiLo effect to the nth degree. You know, people are actually seeing the real power of what Apple can create, and that's just driving people to the Mac platform. But eventually, you know, those platforms will converge. So, you know, the HiLo effect, in effect, becomes, it's just an Apple product, and you know, once someone's used an Apple product, they then get that enthusiasm, and you know, that brings them then into the fold.
Yeah. To go back to something John said, though, can you be a power user and not be a geek, and not want to look under the hood and look at know what every single file does? Do we need to do that, or is that just us and a lot of these folks?
I don't think everybody wants to do that. I mean, we all felt the pain when the iPad came out of, you know, where's the file system? How do I get files onto this damn device? You know, it was a struggle, and it still is. But, you know, that's because we want to do things that perhaps other people don't need to do with it. They just want to use the applications and use the prescribed method of getting data onto the device, whereas we're always used to finding our own particular way of bringing things onto our computers.
Katie?
And you know, Chuck, can I weigh in on that question? The question is, can you be a power user without knowing the file systems and the directories? And I say absolutely yes. There are people performing magic on Macs right now who have no idea how any of that stuff works. You know, I totally believe it.
Yeah, I agree. You definitely can be, but I think there does have to be some kind of happy medium. You have to, you know, we can't all be working on iPads. That's not going to work for everybody. So you can't say that, you know, we're all going to be working on iPads one day. We still have to have, you know, some semblance of more of the traditional Mac OS. But I think the thing that we all like about our Macs, you know, anybody who has to go to work and deal with a Windows box all day, when you just come home and you go, oh, I'm so glad to be here.
Get it off me.
You know, it just works. And part of why the Apple system just works is because, you know, Apple is going to control the sandbox to some degree. They make the hardware, they make the software, and they are getting, you know, the fact that the, you know, App Store is a little bit locked down is because they don't want all this stuff mucking around in their file system. And, you know, I do respect that, but there does have to be, you know, some give to that as well.
Allison.
Chuck, is this mic live?
Yeah.
Is it working?
You're real close.
It's not hot at all.
Get
Our
closer.
old mic was working. So one of the things I wanted to weigh in on was just talking about the idea of a power user is, okay, I want everybody to do a show of hands, including the panel. Do you know someone who knows less than you do about how to use your Mac? No. Okay, now let's try a second question. Who knows someone who knows more than they do about using the Mac? No, Don. Smartest guy in the room right here. Here he is. But no, I think about that a lot because people come to me and go, oh, Allison, you're so smart about the Mac and everything. And I said, yeah, but what happens when you go home? You're helping your brother use his Mac, right? Because you're smarter than him about it. And guess what? He's telling his sister-in-law how to use the Mac. So it's a continuum, really. I mean, we've got certainly the geniuses in the room like Don, but we are all power users because we're power users to somebody, I think.
Now, that's a really interesting point, and I want to bring up something. A lot of you probably weren't at the industry forum yesterday, but Dr. Bill Wecking talked about how he teaches his students to use an iPad. He hands them the iPad. He says, push the button. They push the button, it lights up. He says, slide the slider. They slide the slider, and he said, okay, go. And that's it. And they do it. Apple has done such a great job of making this device intuitive to use that and how many of you out there are the tech support people for your families? How many people wish you weren't the tech support people for your families? Yeah. So Apple, in simplifying some of this, is really helping all of us in a lot of different ways. Tim, I turn to you because, again, you review probably more software. You see more software than any of us. And there's so many different interfaces, there's so many different metaphors for so many different tasks. And I've heard you comment about how things sometimes will violate the tenets of the OS, and sometimes they won't. And I think sometimes I believe you want them to because it would be better.
What was the last? Chuck, I didn't hear you. The last question.
The last part? Yeah, I'm sorry. The last part, that sometimes I hear you discuss certain applications that violate the tenets of the OS. Sometimes I get the impression I think you wish they would because they would be better if they didn't stick to just Apple's script.
Right. There's a lot of possibilities when you take the OS apps and you move them over to iOS. I know it's difficult for some, and they're still grasping, but a good example I wanted to talk about was cloud computing. Everyone, for cloud storage for your OS, it was just basically storage and backup. Everyone thought, this is great. Well, all of a sudden, iOS came and it became, cloud computing became part of syncing. Dropbox was a great example of that. You could all of a sudden take your OS and sync it with your iOS. And that's change, and that's software that really looked ahead and it's moving ahead. And that's what we've got to hope that we see more of in the future is the melding of the two.
Joseph, you do video.
Yes.
And video is changing right now. We're watching a battle for 3D. And that means that your industry has got to see some new tools come out, and pretty quick. And from what we hear about what John Cameron does, a lot of these tools are being invented almost on the fly. Where does that fit into the evolution of the OS? I mean, do you think those worlds have to live with just within the application with very little touch to the OS, or should the OS integrate with some of those to a large degree?
That's a good question. Right now, from what I'm seeing, it is still new. I don't know a whole lot about it yet either. It just hasn't entered my world. But we're seeing DV Garage over here with a conduit that supports 3D. We're seeing Dashwood, who does stereoscopic 3D plugins for FX Factory. And so it is playing well within the current paradigm, but again, that's so new that you are right. It is kind of being invented as we go along. But there are excellent developers right now who are using the current tools to utilize it very efficiently. So.
Yeah, and I think it's an exciting time because we're seeing these tools need to be developed. They're eventually going to filter down. I mean, who knows? By next year, a lot of you may be shooting in 3D with little pocket cameras, and don't discount that. It sounds crazy, but it very easily could happen. Think about some of the technologies that were hot here last year and aren't anymore, or aren't hot anyway, because they've become so widespread. Ken, did you raise your hand? Oh, nobody. Okay, I thought somebody raised their hand. Katie.
No, I was just scratching my head.
You're so quiet.
Yes.
You're so quiet.
I'm waiting for glasses, less TV, 3D myself, but
okay.
No.
No, it's okay.
Katie, can there be one version of an operating system that runs on your iPhone, your iPad, and your desktop?
Can there be one version? Well, Apple keeps saying that, it's the same version of the iOS that runs on your iPhone and your iPad and your Apple TV. And first they said it was OS X. We're running OS 10 on your iPhone and on your iPad. Yeah, nobody believed that, right? I mean, they just called it that.
Well, I don't know if that's fair.
I hope so. I hope. Oh no, I don't want iOS on my Mac. No, that I don't want to see. I think we're going to see them get closer together, but I don't want to see the day where I get iOS on my Mac anytime soon until iOS becomes much more advanced. Will we get there one day? Maybe, but I'm hoping it's not next year or the year after that. I think we've got a couple more progressions down the line to go.
What would make iOS more advanced? What would make iOS advanced enough to be on the Mac for you? Because is that a function of the operating system or a function of the developers and this kind of things? Already iOS is doing stuff that 2 years ago when they introduced the App Store, I wouldn't have thought we could do half of what we're doing now.
Right. Well, I think definitely more multitasking. I think we need true multitasking. I think we need a better access for files and folder structure. I mean, still problematic is getting documents in and out of iOS. You've got to kind of do this Dropbox, Good Sync, iDisk, iWork, Beta, whatever, right. Tango to get stuff in and out. And that's a real problem that I think still has to get fixed.
That requires at least two things.
In iOS version 5. But I do hope, and I think we are starting to see the iOS at least on the iPad and on the Mac, and then hopefully soon on the Apple TV come more into line. So I would like to see that device get more in line.
Let me ask a question though. It almost feels like this should be, and forgive me, Chuck, if I'm. It almost feels like this should be two different conversations. I mean, There are, for all the people who consider themselves power users, because I know that there are some people who would think that I would be, and I know I am compared to some, but I don't really. For most people, what this does is enough for the average consumer, and that's, no offense to anybody here, that's who Apple really wants to reach right now. I mean, they took computer off their name. They consider themselves a consumer electronics company at this point. This is what they want to do. We all have beautiful machines that we would love to see, but this is something that a 92-year-old person who's never used a computer before can pick up and do. I think it's silly to think that the Mac is not going to get more like this, because they're going to sell more Macs that way, and they're going to be more. They're going to be super sexy, great devices that people want who never thought they needed a computer. All they want to do is surf the web and check email. And that at that point, you can have iOS under the hood as long as it still looks like a computer, as long as you still call it a Mac, as long as it still does what everybody is right now spending between $500 and $1,000 to surf the web and check email. It feels to me like that's what's going to happen. Will there still be a place for the trucks? Sure. But I'm not sure you're going to be able to get under the hood of the general Mac relatively soon. Not next year. Hopefully not next year, but relatively soon.
Well, I think we're close, but on the other hand, I think Apple doesn't want the iPad to be a computer replacement. I think they were very careful for that, up until a point of time, and I think they, to some degree, maybe crippled it, with this whole AirPrint thing of, oh yeah, we're going to release printing. Oh, but not quite. Maybe just for a subsect of printers. My grandmother's kind of in a similar situation, I think, to John's. I think it was John's father or whoever it was. AOL is the internet, and she does, email and web searching, and but for printing, the iPad, could be her printer and their computer, and there are ways around that. But I'm not sure that Apple wants the iPad to be a replacement computer just yet. But I think we're moving in that direction.
Right. Okay.
Victor? Katie?
No, I'm done.
Katie mentioned, your grandmother?
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, there's an interesting thing here. I haven't heard anybody here on the panel talk about, with the possible exception of John, what the kids can do with this stuff. I mean, we're old people, okay? And we have grown up with this, and we're watching
the evolution.
But
Hello.
some of us are older.
Katie's mother is my age, by the way.
Katie's mother is your age?
My age. We're in the same years.
Yeah, okay. Okay. I'm going to count to 10, folks, and not respond to that. And they've taken me completely
Sorry, Mom.
off track. No, seriously though, I'm kind of intrigued because one thing Apple doesn't want to do is it doesn't want to build computers for senior citizens who have never used computers before. It would be nice if that's a side effect, but they really have to be looking from just a business perspective. They got to be looking to the younger generations, and that's where I keep trying to look at the evolution of these two operating systems, and will they converge? Can they converge? And where will they converge for the kids?
I think they will converge, and I think that the kids are seeing a great example of their grandparents embracing technology perhaps for the first time. They've been the gaming generations. They've been the ones that have been told since they were little, oh my God, you're growing up with that controller in your hand. And now, like in my family, father-in-law just bought an iPad 2 days ago. I think that's such a great example for those kids that says to them, we can embrace this, and for sure they're going to. There's no question about it. My wife happens to be a second grade teacher, and the iPad is a part of the everyday curriculum. It is just a fact, and they're getting a similar system. It's not from Apple, but it is a pad-based system that now the kids will be able to do interaction with each other and with class, and this is just preparing them from what is going to be very natural. They have to find new ways to create, and I think that what Apple has done with the iOS generation, if you will, is they've opened a door again for the renaissance. It is what's happening. We may be too close to it to see it, but I think we're going to look back and say it was a pivotal moment, in time. And with that, like I said before, comes some pain. They're not going to feel it. They're going to jump with both feet and say, I can't believe these old fogies, that we're talking about this stuff, trucks versus whatever. I mean, think what Apple just did to us with the new Air. I mean, I know of at least 3 people on this panel that are power users that all of a sudden have an Air, and they're thrilled. It does what they need. They don't need a truck. And Steve's not saying none of us need a truck, but it's going to be fewer and fewer. Certainly not the kids. They'll figure it out.
Victor, I said older, I said nothing about old fogey.
That's just for me then.
David.
Well, I think that, we following up on Victor's point, we're at a point of revolution here. I don't know how many people in the audience remember when computers first came out. There was the Atari and the Amiga and the Commodore so there were all these different competitors and different things going on. Apple really took a bunch of the space with the graphical user interface, and then Windows, did what they did. But excuse the pun, but all the windows are being broken now. I mean, everything is changing with touch interface. We haven't talked today on the panel about it, but voice communication is a reality now. There's a Dragon booth down there. You can go and dictate pages and pages. I wrote a book by dictating into a computer. I think the future user interface is going to be completely different than what we're used to. I think the kids now may grow up and not even learn how to type because it's not going to be necessary anymore. And I think we're really much closer to that than we realize. So the iPad is really just a window into the future. Things are really going to change a lot.
Yeah, David, thank you, because I know I wanted to get to this point that you're talking about speech. We're seeing some amazing things being done in the iPhone with the camera interface. I mean, there are just so many opportunities here in these new devices, as sophisticated as they are, with the sensors that they're putting into them. Don?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out as well, looking at the genesis of iOS and looking towards the future, it's not just the user interface that Apple had to design this operating system for. It was for low-powered mobile devices. And as we move through over the next 4 or 5 years, and the mobile devices will become as powerful as the desktop devices now, so why really have 2 separate operating systems when your handheld is running a multi-core processor, which is just as powerful as your desktop machine as well? There's really no need to differentiate them. You can build both UIs or multiple UIs into an operating system. So, it's in Apple's interest, I think, to start converging these operating systems, because the hardware in 5 years will be able to run, both mobile and desktop. Will be able to run everything anyway.
Allison?
I think the challenge there, though, is whether they don't dumb both of them down to the worst of both worlds. I mean, traditionally, Apple hasn't done that, but I fear that we'll lose productivity capability on the Mac OS because of its convergence with iOS, and I would hate to see that happen. Hopefully, more productivity will end up in the iPad, but I do worry about that.
I don't want to sound like I drank the Kool-Aid, but I think the people at Apple are too smart for that. The problem with it is the definition of productivity, because what you want to do as the level of user you are versus what other people want to do, that's kind of a balancing act. So you may think that you lost, and you may turn around and talk to someone who just bought their first device, and they may say, wow, I can't believe everything I can do with it, and it's so easy. And you say, but I can't change the screen color.
Right, exactly. But if they do that convergence and they go to the lowest common denominator of what normal people want, that's what concerns people like us.
Yeah, and it's a legitimate concern, and it's all part of the evolution, which is why that's what we're talking about. And folks, I'm afraid, believe it or not, we're almost out of time. So I want to thank you all for coming. Again, the Macworld Live people for letting us do this. For Katie Floyd, Joseph Nilo, David Sparks, Ken Ray, Tim Verpoorten, Allison Sheridan, Don McAllister, Victor Cajiao, and John Chambers. I'm Chuck Joyner. We're the Mac Roundtable. Thank you. We'll see you online.
MacVoices TV is part of the MacVoices group and a member of Mac Level 10.